There is a version of this Arsenal summer where one winger walks out of the building and everything else falls into place within days. That is exactly where we are right now. Leandro Trossard is on the verge of leaving for Besiktas. Personal terms are close to being agreed. The paperwork is being finalised. And the moment that happens, Arsenal have already told their internal staff to accelerate for a replacement. That replacement has a name, Christos Tzolis, and Tzolis has already made his decision. He is waiting, not for another club, not for a bigger wage. He is waiting specifically for Arsenal, and he has been rejecting other approaches to keep that door open. That is the emotional core of this window right now. A player turning down interest from elsewhere because he wants one specific club to come and get him. That does not happen often in modern football, and when it does, it tells you something about how a move is being engineered behind the scenes. But that is only one thread. At the very same time, Arsenal are trying to close a striker deal that could define their season. They are wrestling with a midfield valuation gap that has not moved in weeks, and two clubs in Italy have just picked up the phone about one of their academy graduates. This is not a quiet window. This is a club moving on 5 fronts at once, and today we are going to walk through every single one of them, piece by piece, so you understand exactly where Arsenal stand. Here is what is genuinely on the line. If Trossard leaves before a replacement winger is lined up, Arsenal risk entering pre-season short on the left side of their attack, especially with Gabriel Martinelli's long-term future also uncertain. If the Julian Alvarez number does not move, Arsenal could lose out on a striker they have been building momentum with for weeks, right as competition for him has otherwise gone quiet. And if Newcastle do not shift from their valuation of Bruno Guimaraes, Arsenal may have to walk away from a midfielder they have wanted for a long time, simply because the number never gets close enough. Every one of these situations has a clock running on it. And that is exactly why this analysis matters right now, not next week. Before we go further, if you want this kind of detailed fact-based breakdown of every Arsenal move as it happens this summer, this channel is where you get it first. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and you will not miss the moment any of these deals actually close. Now let us go through everything story by story, starting with the winger situation that is moving fastest. Christos Tzolis, total priority. The situation with Tzolis is about as clear as transfer stories get. He has been offered other options and turned every single one of them down unless it came from Arsenal. Another club tried to enter the race in the last few days, made contact, tried to advance talks. The response from his camp was consistent. They are waiting for Arsenal, nothing else. This week is being treated as a potentially crucial one for getting the move over the line. Here is my read on that. When a player's camp is willing to turn away a serious approach from another club just to keep a door open for one specific destination, that is not indecision, that is commitment. Tzolis is not sitting back weighing his options. He has already made his choice, and now the only thing standing between him and Arsenal is the mechanics of the deal itself, not his willingness. That shifts the pressure entirely onto the clubs to finish the paperwork, because the player has already given his answer. Think about what it actually costs a player to say no to another suitor. It closes off leverage. It removes a backup option if the preferred move collapses. A player only does that when he is either extremely confident the move is close or extremely determined regardless of risk. Either way, that is useful information for Arsenal because it means they are negotiating with a selling club and a player who both know the direction of travel rather than trying to convince a hesitant target to commit. The phrase used to describe this week as potentially crucial also matters. That is not vague optimism. That is a specific signal that momentum exists right now and could either be converted quickly or allowed to cool if the paperwork drags. The Trossard trigger. Now here is the piece that explains why Tzolis matters so much right now. The Tzolis interest is not happening in isolation. It has been described directly as a reaction to what happens with Trossard. If Trossard goes to Besiktas, Arsenal will immediately speed up their move for a new winger, and Tzolis is the name being discussed internally as the leading option. Arsenal are already in contact with his agent, and he is described as keen on making the move happen. Just like before, another club tried to get involved recently, and the answer from his side stayed the same. They are waiting for Arsenal. What this tells me is that Arsenal are not planning to have a gap on the left wing at any point. This is a sequence plan. One departure, one arrival, timed close together so the squad does not lose depth in that position even for a short window. That is disciplined business, and it explains why the Tzolis story has suddenly picked up urgency this week specifically. There is also something worth noting in how identical the two situations sound. In both cases, a rival club tried to advance talks recently, and in both cases the answer from the player's side was the same phrase, waiting for Arsenal. That kind of consistency across two separate reports is not a coincidence. It suggests a genuinely aligned plan between the player, his representatives and Arsenal, rather than two unrelated stories that happen to overlap. When you see that level of alignment repeated across different reporting, it usually means the framework of a deal already exists, and what remains is simply finalizing figures and paperwork, rather than convincing anyone of the merits of the move. Trossard's own exit is close. On the Trossard side specifically, he is described as close to agreeing personal terms with Besiktas, with the transfer valued at around €20 million coming out of Arsenal. The final paperwork is being prepared, and there is a real possibility the move gets completed within the week. My take here is simple. Trossard played a significant role in Arsenal's push last season, but his game time was already being squeezed, and a club is not going to let a player they value at €20 million sit further down the pecking order once better options arrive. This has the feel of a move that benefits both sides, a fresh start for the player and a freed-up spot, and a bit of transfer income for the club. It is also worth pausing on the timing language here specifically. Final paperwork being prepared is a very late-stage description. That is not scouting, that is not agreeing a framework, that is the administrative process that happens right before a transfer is announced. Combine that with a realistic chance of completion within the week, and you are looking at a domino that could fall very soon, which is exactly why the Tzolis situation is being treated with the same urgency at the same time. These two stories are not running on separate timelines, they are running on the same one. Julian Alvarez. Openness without preference. Now to the striker situation, and this one is more delicate. Julian Alvarez is now reportedly open to joining Arsenal, but his actual preference remains staying in Spain. Arsenal are pushing to get this done before pre-season starts, and interestingly, competition for the player appears to have cooled off. Andrea Berta is the man leading these negotiations, going up against Atletico Madrid, who are demanding £100 million. Arsenal, for their part, are prepared to offer somewhere around £90 million. Here is why I think this one is genuinely fascinating. Openness is not the same as desire. Alvarez being willing to come to Arsenal despite preferring to stay in Spain tells you this is more about the numbers and the situation than about excitement for the project. That is not a criticism of Arsenal, it is simply the reality of a player who is comfortable where he is. What works in Arsenal's favour is that reduced competition. When fewer clubs are chasing a target, negotiating leverage increases naturally, even with a £10 million gap still sitting between the two sides. £10 million is a real distance in a negotiation like this, but it is not an impossible one to close, especially with the buying club pushing hard on time. There is also a psychological dimension worth considering here. A player who prefers to stay in Spain but is still willing to move if things progress is a player who has essentially decided the outcome is acceptable, even if it is not his first choice. That is actually a stronger position for Arsenal than it might first appear, because it removes the risk of a player publicly agitating for a move elsewhere or dragging his feet in negotiations. The obstacle here is entirely financial, not emotional, and financial gaps are the kind of obstacle that skilled negotiators like Andrea Berta are specifically brought in to close. The fact that Arsenal are pushing to have this resolved before pre-season begins also tells you they see a defined deadline, not an open-ended pursuit. Bruno Guimaraes, evaluation standoff. This next one is the most stuck of all the current situations. Arsenal are weighing up whether to even continue pursuing Bruno Guimaraes after initially being led to believe a £50 million deal was possible. They still want him, but they have been caught off guard by how rigid Newcastle have been on the price. Newcastle have been told exactly what Arsenal are willing to pay, and even with add-ons included, that number has never gone beyond £60 million. Newcastle's hierarchy, in conversations with intermediaries, have made it clear they want something close to the £100 million that Tottenham paid for Sandro Tonali. Guimaraes' own representatives have been pushing Newcastle to sell, even arguing that a player in the peak years of his career deserves the chance to play Champions League football, and that he has given everything to the club already. But the player himself will only push for a departure if Arsenal's bid gets close to Newcastle's valuation. As things stand, that gap has not closed, and he is scheduled to return to pre-season training with Newcastle at the end of this month. What stands out to me here is the size of the gap. £50 million to £100 million is not a negotiating tactic. That is two clubs starting from completely different realities. Arsenal believed one number early on, and Newcastle have since made clear they are working from another number entirely. Unless one side moves significantly, and soon, this deal risks stalling out before pre-season even begins, which is exactly the outcome Arsenal are now having to weigh up. What makes this situation different from the winger business we just covered is the direction of pressure. With Tzolis and Trossard, the pressure sits mostly with the clubs to finalise paperwork because the players are already aligned. With Guimaraes, the pressure sits with the player and his representatives to convince Newcastle to even engage, while Arsenal wait to see if that pressure produces any movement in valuation. The argument being made on Guimaraes' behalf that a player in the peak years of his career deserves Champions League football after giving everything to his current club is a classic case being made to a boardroom, not to a fan base. Whether that argument works depends entirely on how much Newcastle value keeping their captain over the financial upside of a sale, and right now, all the available evidence points toward Newcastle holding firm. Morgan Rogers, the priority winger who is not the priority winger. While the left-wing situation with Trossard and Tzolis is happening on the flank, there is also a number 10 role being targeted. Morgan Rogers remains Arsenal's priority target for that position. Real progress has been made on personal terms with the player himself, but the club-to-club conversations with Aston Villa are expected to be far tougher, with Villa valuing him at around £130 million. Bradley Barcola also remains under consideration as an alternative, although Liverpool are monitoring his situation as well. My analysis on this one is that personal terms being sorted so early is actually the most telling detail. It means the player himself is essentially ready to go. The entire deal now hinges on Arsenal and Aston Villa finding common ground on a valuation that currently sits at £130 million, which is an enormous number for a domestic transfer. And the presence of Barcola as a named alternative, with Liverpool circling the same player, tells you Arsenal are not going to sit and wait indefinitely if the Rodgers number does not move. This is actually a very similar pattern to what we saw with Guimaraes, a player situation that is essentially resolved sitting on top of a club-to-club valuation gap that is not resolved at all. The difference is that Arsenal appear to have a genuine plan B in Barcola, which changes the calculation significantly. In the Guimaraes case, there is no alternative name mentioned at all, which puts more pressure on that specific deal succeeding or failing on its own terms. With Rodgers, Arsenal have more room to walk away from a number they consider excessive because they are not depending on this single outcome to fill the number 10 role. Gabriel Martinelli, open to offers, not being pushed out. On the outgoing side, Juventus and Roma have both made inquiries about Gabriel Martinelli ahead of the summer window. Arsenal are not actively trying to sell him, but they are described as open to considering the right offer for the Brazilian winger. Here is what I take from that phrasing specifically. There is a real difference between a club actively shopping a player and a club simply being open if the number is right. Arsenal are in the second category with Martinelli. That is a position of strength, not urgency. It means any interested party has to come in with a serious offer to even start a conversation, rather than Arsenal needing to find a buyer to balance the books. Two clubs from Serie A showing interest at the same time also tells you something about how Martinelli is viewed outside England. He is not being treated as a squad filler option. He is being treated as a genuine target by clubs competing for European places. That interest gives Arsenal negotiating comfort, because competition between two suitors tends to push value upward rather than downward. And Arsenal do not need to accept the first number that lands on the table. Mikel Oyarzabal, World Cup form triggers interest. Finally, on the forward front, Arsenal are preparing a bid for Mikel Oyarzabal, having been impressed by his performances at the World Cup. He is 29 years old and currently under contract with Real Sociedad until the year 2028. Barcelona and clubs from Serie A are also showing interest in him. My honest read here is that this is the earliest stage of interest among everything we have covered today. A club preparing a bid is not the same as a club negotiating one. And with Barcelona and Serie A sides also circling, and Real Sociedad holding a contract through 2028, there is no urgency on the selling club's side at all. This is one to watch developing over the coming weeks rather than one to expect movement on immediately. What is interesting is the reason behind the interest itself. This is not a case of Arsenal scouting a player over a full season and building a long-term profile. This is form-driven interest, triggered specifically by performances at a major tournament. Form-driven links can move quickly if a club decides to act on the momentum, but they can also cool just as quickly if attention shifts elsewhere. With a contract running until 2028 and multiple major clubs circling, Real Sociedad hold all the leverage here, and Arsenal would likely need to pay a premium reflective of that tournament form, rather than a discounted rate. Now let us step back and look at the wider picture, because two separate pieces of reporting this week help explain exactly why all of these individual stories are happening at the same time. The Martinelli asking price and what it funds. The first piece of context worth understanding is around Arsenal's approach to funding this window. Arsenal are heading into a summer where incomings are expected to be significant and outgoings may need to help pay for them. Roma and Juventus have both made contact about Martinelli, and Arsenal have quoted the Italian clubs a figure of around £40 million to even begin serious discussions. Martinelli originally cost Arsenal just £6 million and has been a key part of the squad under Mikel Arteta, but his starting position was already being challenged by Trossard, and with a new winger potentially arriving too, his path to regular football was narrowing. My analysis of this is straightforward. A £40 million valuation on a player who cost £6 million is a significant return on investment, and it tells you Arsenal see this less as losing a player and more as converting one asset into the funding for a bigger one. With Bradley Barcola and Julian Alvarez both being linked at figures well above what Martinelli would bring in, a sale like this would not complete a deal on its own, but it would meaningfully contribute to one. This is squad business, not sentiment, and it is exactly the kind of trade-off clubs make when they are trying to fund multiple ambitious signings in the same window. The Rashford link and why it is only a rumour. The second piece worth breaking down involves Marcus Rashford. This one needs to be handled carefully, because unlike everything else we have covered today, this is not an active club-to-club negotiation. This is commentary. Rio Ferdinand has said publicly that Arsenal should move quickly for Rashford, describing a £40 million fee as one Arsenal should accept without hesitation. Arsenal legend David Seaman has also spoken positively about a possible Rashford move, calling him a real talent, though Seaman himself raised the obvious question of who Rashford would actually replace given the presence of both Martinelli and Trossard in that same part of the squad. I want to be very clear with you here, this is not confirmed transfer interest from Arsenal. This is pundit opinion from two respected former players, but opinion nonetheless. What we do know as fact is that Rashford failed to secure a permanent move to Barcelona, with the Catalan club instead choosing to sign Anthony Gordon from Newcastle United for £70 million. We also know Rashford is being made available for around £40 million to clubs other than Manchester City and Liverpool, and that Tottenham are also said to be showing interest in him. So here is the honest picture. Rashford is a player without a fully settled path back into regular football at his current club. He is available at a set price to selected clubs, and two well-known Arsenal voices believe he would be worth pursuing. But there is no reporting here of Arsenal themselves opening talks, and Seaman's own comment about who Rashford would replace actually undercuts the idea that this is a straightforward fit. Treat this one as speculation worth watching, not as business in progress. So that is the full picture as it stands. A winger swap that looks close to completing itself, a striker negotiation where the gap is narrowing but not closed, a midfield pursuit that may be stalling on price alone, an academy graduate who could fund part of the spending, and a forward reportedly on the club's radar after a strong World Cup. Layer on top of that a pundit-driven Rashford storyline that has not yet become anything concrete, and you have a summer window that is genuinely moving on every front at once. If you want the next update the moment any of these deals actually close, make sure you are subscribed to this channel, because this is where you will get the full picture, broken down clearly, every single time.